The morning my brother called me a failure in front of 40 people, I was wearing the same sport coat I'd bought in 1987. It still fit. That was one thing I had going for me. I remember standing near the back of the room, holding a paper cup of bad coffee, watching my brother work the crowd the way he always did, hand on shoulders. Big laugh, the kind of confidence that fills a room before the person even opens their mouth. My brother has always known how to make an entrance. I've always been better at exits. That morning was my father's retirement party. 63 years old, stepping down from the company we had both worked at for most of our adult lives. Except by that point, only one of us was still there. And it wasn't me. My name is Raymond. I'm 67 years old now, and I want to tell you what happened the day a lawyer called me into a conference room and changed everything I thought I understood about my own life. But to explain that day, I have to go back to the beginning. Back to when my brother Marcus and I were just two kids from Cincinnati who thought we were going to change the world. Our father worked the line at Onstenzant Bacter for 31 years. He never complained about it, not once that I heard. But I watched him come home every evening with grease under his fingernails that wouldn't fully wash out, and I made myself a quiet promise when I was about 12 years old. I was going to build something that belonged to me, something no one could take a wrench to. Marcus made the same promise, I think. He just made it louder. We were 3 years apart, me, the older one, Marcus, the one everyone noticed. He was the talker, the charmer, the one teachers remembered. I was the one who stayed after class and actually finished the extra credit. We complemented each other in a way that felt designed. And when we were in our late 20s, exhausted from working jobs that paid our rent but nothing else, we decided to build something together. The idea came from a problem I had noticed at work. I was doing logistics consulting at the time, small regional contracts, and I kept running into the same wall companies had no clean way to track vendor compliance across multiple warehouses. They were drowning in spreadsheets, phone calls, paperwork that contradicted itself. I started sketching out a software solution on legal pads during my lunch breaks. Nothing fancy at first, just a logic map of how the data should flow. Marcus came over one Sunday and I walked him through it on my kitchen table. He leaned back in his chair and said, "Ray, if you can build that, I can sell it." And that was Cornerstone Logistics Solutions. Named because I said we'd be the foundation other companies built on. Marcus thought it sounded too humble. He wanted something with elite or apex in the name. I won that argument. It was one of the last ones I won for a long time. I want to be honest about the early years, because this story doesn't make sense without that honesty. Marcus was extraordinary at what he did. He could walk into a room with a prospect who had never heard of us and walk out 45 minutes later with a handshake and a letter of intent. He understood people in a way I never fully did. He remembered names, remembered details, remembered what someone had mentioned 6 months ago about their kid's baseball team. He made every client feel like the most important person in the room. And I was building the actual product while he did all of that. I wrote the core architecture myself. 18-hour days, sometimes 20. I lived on black coffee and sandwiches from the gas station 3 blocks from my apartment. My then-girlfriend told me she felt like she was dating a ghost. She wasn't wrong. I was there, but I wasn't fully present, because inside my head I was always halfway into the next problem, the next module, the next version. When we landed our first real client, a mid-sized distribution company in Indiana, I remember Marcus called me at midnight and we both yelled into our phones like we'd won something. We'd won the right to work twice as hard. We were equal partners on paper. 50-50. That was the agreement we signed in front of a notary in November of 2001. I have that document. I kept it in a fireproof lockbox in my closet for 23 years, which tells you something about the part of my brain that was always waiting. The shift happened gradually. These things usually do. Marcus hired a saleswoman named Diane in 2004. She was sharp, organized, everything he valued. Within a year, she was running our client relationships almost entirely. Marcus started attending industry conferences, giving talks, positioning himself as the thought leader behind Cornerstone. He was good at it. He was genuinely good at it. And I told myself it was fine because I was the one who preferred the back office anyway. But somewhere in that process, the story of who we were began to change. I started hearing it first from a new client in 2006. She mentioned that she'd seen Marcus speak at a conference and been impressed by how he'd built the system from scratch. I assumed it was a misquote, a simplification, the kind of thing that happens when a salesman talks about his company. I mentioned it to Marcus that evening. He said, "Ray, come on. Nobody wants to hear about the guy in the back room. They want to know the company has a visionary. Let me do my job." I let him do his job. That was my first mistake, and I made it because I was tired and I hated confrontation, and I genuinely believed that the truth would always be self-evident to anyone who looked closely enough. I believed that for a long time. I was wrong. By 2009, Cornerstone had 17 employees and 4 major regional contracts. Marcus had moved into a house in Hyde Park. I had a decent apartment in Oakley. We were both doing well. That was the year he brought in outside investors. I was not consulted before he began those conversations. I found out about the first investor meeting the same way I found out a lot of things in those years after the fact, from someone who assumed I already knew. When I confronted Marcus, he told me it was just exploratory. Preliminary conversations, he said. Nothing binding. I was going to loop you in this week. The investment brought in capital that let us scale faster than I'd thought possible. It also brought in a board, and the board, for reasons I came to understand much later, liked Marcus's version of the company's story. His name appeared first on the operating agreement restructuring. My role was reclassified as Chief Technology Officer, a title that sounds important until you realize it comes with a significantly reduced share of equity. I pushed back. I remember sitting across from Marcus in his new office with the view of the river and telling him that what was happening wasn't right, that we had built this together and the paperwork was starting to say otherwise. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, "You're not a founder, Ray. You're the first employee. There's a difference." I left his office and sat in my car in the parking garage for 45 minutes. I did not quit. I should have. But I had built that system and I couldn't bring myself to walk away from it. That was my second mistake, believing that the thing I'd created still needed me to protect it. The retirement party was my father's idea. His name was Walter, and at 63 he had decided he wanted to travel, specifically to see every baseball stadium in the country with my mother before either of them got too old. It was a good plan. My father had earned his rest. Marcus organized the party. He rented a private room at a restaurant downtown, invited 40-some people, and gave a speech. The speech was where things went wrong. I can still hear parts of it. Marcus standing at the front of the room with his glass raised, talking about legacy and vision and what it meant to build something that lasted. He talked about Cornerstone. He talked about how he'd seen a problem that no one else was solving and had sat down and figured out how to fix it. Not we, not us, not Raymond and I. He said I. I watched my father's face during that speech. My father, who had watched me disappear into my apartment for 2 years building that software, who had lent me $3,000 when I needed to replace my development equipment, who knew because I had told him what those first years actually looked like. My father was looking at his hands. When the speech ended, there was a moment, just a moment, where I thought Marcus might correct himself, might raise his glass and say, "And of course, none of this without my brother." He thanked the investors. He thanked the staff. He thanked our parents for their support. He did not mention me by name. Someone near me started clapping, and I clapped too because my hands were moving before my brain caught up, and then my brother looked across the room and found my face, and he smiled. Not warmly. The smile that meant he knew exactly what he'd done, and he wanted me to know he knew. Later, when the party thinned out and people were gathering coats, one of the newer board members came up to me and introduced herself, said she'd heard a lot about me, said I seemed more behind the scenes. I said, "That's one way to put it." She moved on. I set down my paper cup and went to find my father. He was standing near the window. When I reached him, he put his hand on my arm and said quietly, "I know what you built, son." That was all. But it was enough to keep me from driving my car into the Ohio River on the way home. The formal break came 18 months later. Marcus and the board had decided to pursue an acquisition offer from a national logistics firm. I won't name them here. The offer was substantial. It was also structured in a way that paid Marcus significantly more than it paid me, based on the equity restructuring that had happened 4 years earlier. I consulted an attorney. She told me what I already suspected, that I had allowed my position to erode incrementally without documenting my objections formally, and while I had some grounds to dispute the payout structure, a legal fight would be expensive, slow, and uncertain. I asked her if there was any other option. She said, "You could accept the payout, move on, and protect your peace." I accepted the payout. It was a decent amount of money, not proportional to what I'd contributed, but enough that I wasn't starting over from nothing at 53. I left Cornerstone Logistics Solutions, and I did not look back for a long time because looking back felt like something that would swallow me whole. Marcus and I did not speak for almost 8 years. I kept busy. I went back to consulting, smaller contracts, companies that needed infrastructure work and weren't looking for a visionary. I was good at what I did, and my clients trusted me, even if nobody was asking me to give speeches at conferences. I fixed things. I always had been better at fixing things than talking about them. I thought about Cornerstone sometimes. You can't build something for a decade and fully stop thinking about it. But I made a practice of not tracking the news, not following the company's growth, not watching from a distance the way some people do when a relationship ends and they keep checking the other person's social media. I had decided to live in the present, and that was mostly what I did. My father called me every Sunday. We talked about baseball, about the trips he and my mother were taking, about the weather in whatever city they were visiting. He never brought up Marcus unless I did, and I almost never did. It was a kindness. In the spring of 2022, my father called on a Tuesday, which was unusual. He didn't say anything for a second when I picked up, and I felt something drop in my stomach before he'd spoken a word. "Marcus had a stroke," he said. It was serious. Not immediately fatal, but serious enough that the company Cornerstone had not been acquired after all. The deal had fallen through years ago, and Marcus had retained ownership was suddenly without its visible leader. I heard all of this from my father over the following weeks. I did not call Marcus. I wasn't sure what I would say. What I didn't know, and wouldn't know for another 14 months, was that the stroke had changed something in my brother. Not his personality, not fundamentally, but something about proximity to death, about lying in a hospital bed at 59 and looking at the ceiling, had apparently made him think very hard about certain things. He died in August of 2023. A second stroke, this one without warning. He was at home. He was 61 years old. I got the call from his wife, a woman named Patricia, whom I had met only twice at family events over the years. She was composed on the phone in the way that people sometimes are when they are holding themselves together through sheer will. She said the memorial would be the following Saturday and that she hoped I could come. I came. The memorial was at a large venue downtown, the kind of place that holds corporate events and fundraisers. There were a lot of people. Cornerstone had grown considerably in the years since I'd left, and many of the people in that room owed a version of their career to Marcus. I understood that. I didn't resent it. I stood near the back and watched people move through the space, and said quiet things to people who introduced themselves to me as colleagues of my brother's. There was a video tribute, photos and footage from Marcus's life, his children when they were small, award ceremonies, company milestones. I watched it from across the room. I was not in it. Toward the end of the formal portion of the service, Marcus's son, my nephew, a young man of about 30, who I had seen perhaps 4 times in his life, stepped up to the microphone. His name was Derek. Derek was the version of Marcus that Marcus had always wanted to be. Even taller, even more commanding. He'd grown up in a beautiful house in Hyde Park and attended good schools and joined the company 3 years ago at a senior level, skipping the years of unglamorous work that usually come first. He carried himself the way people do when they have never seriously doubted their own importance. He spoke for about 5 minutes about his father's legacy, the company, the vision, the sacrifice. Then he looked up from his notes and out across the room, and his eyes found me near the back. "There are some people here today," he said, his voice carrying easily, "who will try to attach themselves to my father's story now that he's gone. People who played minor roles and have since spent years inflating them. My father built something real, and real things belong to the people who actually built them." The room was very quiet. He wasn't looking at anyone else when he said it. I want to be clear about that. I held my paper cup with both hands and looked back at him, and did not say anything. A few people near me glanced over. I looked at the floor. I thought about my father's hand on my arm at the retirement party 11 years ago. I thought about the fireproof lockbox in my closet at home. I thought about 18-hour days and gas station sandwiches and a legal pad full of logic maps that I had kept in a box in my basement for 22 years. I set down my cup and I walked out. The call came 6 weeks later. A woman named Helen Marsh, an attorney, left a voicemail saying she represented the estate of Marcus William Calloway and needed to speak with me at my earliest convenience regarding a matter of significant interest. Her voice was careful and professional and gave nothing away. I listened to the message twice. Then I sat in my kitchen for a while. Then I called her back. She asked if I could come to her office the following Thursday. I said I could. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't know what to expect, and I had spent enough of my life being surprised by things I thought I understood that I had learned to hold my expectations loosely. The office was downtown, 14th floor, the kind of firm where everything is either dark wood or glass. Helen Marsh was in her late 40s, precise and unhurried. She offered me coffee. I took it. She put a folder on the table between us. "Your brother updated his estate documents 14 months ago," she said. "After his first stroke. The timing was deliberate. He had what I would describe as a clear and considered purpose in making the changes he made." I didn't say anything. "Before I walk you through the specifics," she said, "I want to share something with you." Marcus included a letter with the estate documents. He asked that it be read to you in person, before the formal provisions. She took a single folded page from the folder and held it for a moment. "I'll read it as written," she said. His words. She unfolded the page. "Raymond, I've been trying to write this for 4 months, and every time I start, I end up staring at the wall. So I'm going to say it plainly and let you make of it what you will. I took credit for what you built, not all at once and not in a single moment, but over years by letting a story form that wasn't accurate and not correcting it when I should have. I told myself you didn't care about recognition, that you were better off in the background, that the company needed a visible face, and I was that face. Some of that was true. Most of it was convenient. The system you designed in 2001 is still the core architecture of Cornerstone. The consultants we brought in 5 years ago wanted to replace it, and I told them no, because I knew the new version wouldn't be better. I knew that because I understood, even then, what you had built. I just didn't say it out loud, where it counted. What Derek said at the memorial, I did not ask him to say that. I want you to know that. He is his father's son in some ways I'm not proud of. I'm sorry, Ray. I don't know if that means anything after this long, but I want it on record." She folded the letter and set it on the table and looked at me. I looked at the window. The city was out there doing its thing, indifferent and constant. "Take whatever time you need," she said. I don't know how long I sat there. Not very long, probably. It felt long. "All right," I said finally. "Tell me the rest." What Marcus had done in those revised estate documents was this. Cornerstone Logistics Solutions, which was valued at approximately $38 million at the time of Marcus's death, had never been fully sold. Marcus had retained controlling ownership. In the estate revision, he had structured the inheritance in a very specific way. His wife Patricia received the family home, their personal assets, and a substantial financial provision that would take care of her comfortably. His son Derek received a one-time disbursement of $100,000 and a letter not read to me, but reference that apparently explained Marcus's reasoning. The controlling ownership stake of Cornerstone Logistics Solutions, the company that I had designed on a legal pad at my kitchen table in 2001, was transferred to me. Not a portion. Not a consultancy role. Controlling ownership. I asked Helen to say that again. She said it again. I asked if there were conditions. She said the only condition was that I review the company's current operations within 90 days and determine whether I wanted to continue in an active capacity or arrange a managed sale through a firm Marcus had already identified for exactly that possibility. "He wanted you to have the choice," she said. He was specific about that. He said, and I'm quoting from our conversation, "Ray spent his whole life not having the choice. At least let him have this one." I won't pretend I drove home calmly. I pulled over twice, once to just breathe and once because I was crying in a way that made it difficult to see the road, and I'm 67 years old and not embarrassed to say that. I was crying for the 23 years, and for my father's hand on my arm, and for the gas station sandwiches, and for the kid in the garage who just wanted to build something that lasted. I was crying for Marcus too, a little. I know that's complicated. He was my brother, and he was also someone who had diminished me in ways that had cost me more than money. Both of those things were true at the same time. I called my father that evening, not on Sunday, on a Tuesday, which is unusual. He was quiet for a moment when I finished telling him everything. Then he said, "I know what you built, son." Same words as before, different weight. 2 weeks after the reading, I received a call from Derek. He had been notified of the estate provisions, as he was legally required to be. The conversation was brief. He wanted to know whether I would consider a buyout arrangement. He said it in the careful language of someone who has recently spoken to his own attorney. I told him I would need some time to review my options. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I didn't know about the letter. What he wrote to you. I want you to know that." I believed him, actually. That part I believed. What Derek said at the memorial, I said. "Did you know what you were doing when you said it?" Another silence. "I was protecting what I thought was the family legacy," he said. "I thought I knew the whole story." "That's the thing about stories," I said. "They don't wait for you to know the whole thing before they start." I ended the call and sat with it for a while. I spent 6 weeks reviewing Cornerstone's current operations. I went through the financials, the contracts, the infrastructure. I spoke with the senior staff who were still there, some of whom had been with the company since its early years and recognized my name, and some of whom were younger and looked at me carefully, trying to figure out who exactly I was and what I represented. The core architecture was still there, updated, layered over, modern interfaces built on top of it, but the underlying logic, the data flow I had mapped out on a legal pad in 2001, was still running underneath everything. Like the foundation of a house that has been renovated so many times, the residents have forgotten what the original walls looked like, but the structure holds the whole thing up regardless. I found that quietly moving. I won't apologize for that. I decided not to sell. I decided to stay, at least for a period, in an advisory capacity that could become something more if it made sense. I brought in an operational director, a woman with 30 years of logistics experience who had no interest in politics and every interest in efficiency. The two of us spent the fall quietly reorganizing things. I also did one other thing. I had the legal team update the company's official history, the website, the documentation, the materials used in client presentations. The founding section now reads accurately. It describes two brothers who started a company in Cincinnati in 2001. It names us both. It's a small thing, maybe, a paragraph on a website, but it's accurate. And after 23 years of the alternative, accurate felt like something worth having. Derek and I have spoken a few more times since then. We are not close. I'm not sure we will be. But we are civil in the way that people can be when they have both had to reckon with a complicated truth about someone they loved. He asked me once, in one of those conversations, whether I was angry. I thought about it honestly before I answered. For a long time, I said. Not the way I used to be. What changed? He asked. I stopped waiting for the acknowledgement to come from your father, I said. And then it came anyway. He didn't say anything to that, but I think he understood. My father turned 81 in October. He and my mother made it to 37 baseball stadiums before her knees said enough. He told me the story of every single one of them, at length, over many Sunday phone calls, and I listened to all of it. I am 67 years old. I have been in rooms where someone told the wrong story about me, and I stayed quiet because I was tired, or afraid, or because I had convinced myself that the truth would eventually surface on its own. Sometimes it does. Sometimes it takes 23 years and a stroke and a letter from a man who finally, at the end, wanted to get something right. I kept the legal pad, the original one, from 2001, with the logic maps drawn in blue ink on those green gridded pages. It's framed now, in my office. Nobody asks about it except people who know enough to recognize what they're looking at. When they do ask, I tell them the whole story. I've gotten good at that. My brother was flawed and complicated and brilliant in his way, and somewhere in the last year of his life he decided that the truth mattered more than the story he had been telling. I don't know what that cost him. I don't know what he thought about at night, Whether he had made peace with it or whether it kept him up, what I know is this: the foundation holds up the house, whether anyone acknowledges it or not. But it's better when someone does. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's just the record finally getting set straight. And sometimes, if you wait long enough, the person who owes you the truth is the one who finally tells it.